Imagine a secret. Not a secret whispered in hushed tones between conspirators, but one carved into the very landscape of a nation, buried beneath centuries of soil and legend. A secret that, if fully understood, would rewrite the opening chapters of American history, pushing back the curtain on European contact not by decades, but by centuries. Forget Columbus for a moment and cast your mind further back to a time when sagas were sung around hearths and the North Atlantic was a realm of myth and monstrous waves. Our story begins not in the warm breezes of the Caribbean, but on the windswept shores of Greenland around the year 985 AD. Here, Eric the Red, an Icelandic outlaw, had established a struggling Norse colony. His son, Leif Erikson, a man whose name echoes faintly in American textbooks, would embark on a journey of discovery. But Leif's voyage and the subsequent more ambitious attempts to settle a new land were not isolated incidents. They were part of a sustained, if ultimately doomed, effort by a tenacious seafaring people to carve out a new destiny in an unknown world. What few realize is the sheer scale of this endeavor, the intricate web of voyages, settlements, and devastating conflicts that unfolded across a vast, forgotten American wilderness. The tale of the Norse in North America is often presented as a footnote. They found Vinland, tried to settle, and left. The reality is far more complex, a sprawling epic of exploration, cultural clash, and environmental adaptation that spanned nearly 500 years. It begins with Rafe, who in around 1000 AD sailed west from Greenland, driven by tales of land cited by a previous mariner, Bjarni Herjolfsson. Leif, a devout Christian, named the lands he found Helluland, Slabland, likely Baffin Island, Markland, Forestland, likely Labrador, and finally Vinland, Wineland, or Pastureland, probably Newfoundland. It was in Vinland that the dream of a new Norse colony truly took root. The sagas describe a land of abundant resources, salmon-filled rivers, forests suitable for timber, a crucial commodity desperately needed in treeless Greenland, and wild grapes that gave Vinland its name. But it was not an empty land. From the moment they landed, the Norse encountered the Skraelings, the indigenous inhabitants of North America. These were likely ancestors of the Beothic, Mi'kmaq, or Inuit peoples. The initial encounters were a mix of curiosity and cautious trade, but inevitably, conflict erupted. The most vivid accounts come from the saga of Thorfinn Karlsefni, a formidable Icelandic merchant who around 1004 AD led the most ambitious attempt to colonize Vinland. Karlsefni's expedition was not a small reconnaissance mission. He arrived with 3 ships, 160 men and women, and livestock, a complete colonizing party. They spent 3 years in Vinland, establishing a base, likely at Lonzo Meadows in Newfoundland, the only confirmed Norse site in North America. This was a true transatlantic undertaking, a mini-migration across one of the world's most treacherous oceans. Imagine the courage, or perhaps the desperation that drove these people. They brought their cattle, their sheep, their dreams of a new life. They built longhouses, forges, and boat repair sheds. They fished, hunted, and explored the surrounding wilderness. Yet the sagas depict a constant struggle, not just against the harsh environment, but against the Skraelings. One particularly dramatic account describes a massive battle where the Norse were initially overwhelmed by a barrage of projectiles, only to be saved by the pregnant Freydis Erikdatson, Leif's half-sister, who, bearing her breast and wielding a sword, charged the fleeing Norsemen, shaming them into rallying and driving off the attackers. This fierce, uncompromising spirit defined their presence. Despite their tenacity, Karlsefni's colony ultimately failed. The constant threat from the Skraelings, combined with internal squabbles and the sheer isolation, proved too much. They returned to Greenland, bringing with them not vast riches, but a better understanding of the new world and its inhabitants. However, the story does not end with Karlsefni's retreat. Subsequent voyages, though less detailed in the sagas, continued for centuries. Timber was still needed in Greenland, and Markland, Labrador, became a vital resource. Archaeological evidence from Norse settlements in Greenland includes timbers identified as coming from North American trees, indicating a persistent trade or foraging route. This wasn't just a single event, it was a sustained connection. Here's where the astonishing scale truly comes into focus. While Lonzo Meadows is the only confirmed settlement, evidence suggests a wider North presence. The Vinland map, though its authenticity is still debated, depicts North America and fueled decades of speculation. More compelling is the Kensington runestone, discovered in Minnesota in 1898, claiming to be from a Norse expedition in 1362. While many scholars dismiss it as a hoax, its very existence and the deep emotional connection many Scandinavian Americans feel to it highlights a longing for a more expansive Norse narrative in the heartland.
Beyond these controversial artifacts, consider the Lost Fleet scenario. The Norse Greenland colony itself persisted for nearly 500 years, from the late 10th century until the early 15th century. During this time, the North Atlantic was their highway. They sailed not just to Iceland and Norway, but constantly between their two main settlements in Greenland, the eastern and western settlements. They also needed supplies. What if, over those centuries, more ships, perhaps diverted by storms or driven by desperate exploration for new resources, made landfall further south than Newfoundland? Imagine a ship blown far off course, landing in the estuary of the St. Lawrence River, or even further south along the coasts of Maine or Massachusetts. While establishing a permanent colony might have been impossible, the Norse were adept at building temporary shelters, hunting, and foraging. They were explorers, driven by a spirit of adventure and a desperate need for resources. The idea that sporadic, unrecorded landings occurred throughout the entire period of the Greenland colonies is not far-fetched. What makes this truly remarkable is the cultural exchange that likely occurred even in fleeting moments. While the conflicts were brutal, there were also periods of trade. The sagas describe the Skraelings marveling at Norse iron tools and weapons and trading furs for red cloth and milk. These interactions, however brief, represent the first sustained contact between Europeans and Native Americans, preceding Columbus by nearly 500 years. The impact of this contact on indigenous populations is often overlooked. The Norse brought not only iron, but also diseases. While the scale of disease transmission was likely far less devastating than after Columbus, given the smaller Norse numbers and sporadic contact, it's not impossible that pathogens exchanged hands. The very concept of first contact suddenly shifts. So why did this ambitious North venture ultimately fail, and why was it largely forgotten? Several factors conspired against them. Climate change. The medieval warm period that facilitated the initial settlement of Greenland began to cool dramatically by the 14th century, leading to the Little Ice Age. This made sea travel more perilous, growing crops more difficult, and Arctic ice more prevalent, effectively cutting off Greenland from Europe and, by extension, from North America. Hostile environment and indigenous resistance. The Skraelings were not easily subjugated. Their numerical superiority, their knowledge of the land, and their effective resistance ultimately made permanent Norse settlement untenable. The saga accounts consistently highlight the constant threat they posed. Lack of manpower and resources. The Greenland colonies themselves were small and isolated. They simply didn't have the population or the industrial capacity to sustain a large-scale colonization effort across another ocean, especially when their own survival was increasingly precarious. Cultural and technological stagnation. While the Norse were master shipbuilders and navigators, their technology evolved little over centuries. They clung to their traditional ways, unable to adapt on a large scale to the challenges of the New World and its inhabitants. Distance and isolation. The sheer distance from their European homelands made resupply and reinforcement incredibly difficult. Communication was slow and sporadic, and their small outposts were truly on the edge of the known world. The eventual fate of the Norse Greenlanders themselves is one of history's enduring mysteries. By the early 14th century, contact ceased, and when later European explorers arrived, the Norse settlements were deserted, their inhabitants vanished. Did they die out from famine and disease? Did they slowly intermarry with the Inuit? Did some attempt a final, desperate voyage back to Europe, only to be lost at sea? The answer remains elusive, adding another layer of intrigue to their transatlantic saga. The enduring legacy of this phantom fleet and its attempts to settle America is multifaceted. For Native Americans, it represents a period of early interaction and successful resistance against European encroachment. For Europeans, it's a testament to the insatiable drive for exploration and expansion, long before the Age of Discovery officially began. For Americans today, it's a profound reminder that the history of our continent is far richer and more complex than the simplified narratives often presented. Consider the implications. If the Norse had succeeded, what would America look like today? A Scandinavian-influenced East Coast? A different language? Different cultural norms? Would the indigenous populations have fared differently against a slower, more localized colonization? It's a tantalizing what-if that forces us to reevaluate the contingencies of history. The story of the Norse in North America is not just about a few adventurous Vikings. It's about the collision of worlds, the fierce struggle for survival in a harsh wilderness, and the incredible audacity of a people who dared to push the boundaries of their known world, creating a tapestry of events that, though often overlooked, profoundly shaped the early historical landscape of the American continent. It is a testament to human endeavor, resilience, and the enduring mysteries that still lie hidden in the forgotten pages of our shared past. The echoes of their longboats, the clash of their iron axes, and the cries of their battles against the Skraelings are a powerful reminder that America's story began far earlier and in far more dramatic fashion than many of us ever realized. This forgotten chapter invites us to look beyond the familiar landmarks and recognize the deeper currents of history that have flowed through this land for over a millennium. The North American wilderness was not a blank slate, but a vibrant, contested space where different cultures met, clashed, and left their indelible, if often invisible, marks. The Phantom Fleet may have receded into legend, but their journey across the Atlantic remains one of the most astonishing and pivotal, yet largely unsung episodes in the making of America.